Well, welcome everyone to COP29, and welcome to the Digital Pavilion. We are about to host a panel discussion on the pivotal role of accurate and reliable data on driving methane emission reduction actions. My name is Maria Cuosa. I'm the CEO of a company called Aramon. We do emissions monitoring, specifically on oil, gas, and chemical assets. We do emissions monitoring with site-level techniques. So basically, we have our own technology, which we can mount into a drone and then fly over assets, whether those are oil and gas assets, chemical assets, landfills, monitor multiple different parameters, among others, methane. Today, I'm very honored to host this panel, and I have lovely guests today, Marta Vasquez. You are a principal, a partner and associate at Boston Consulting Group. And then I have Charlotte Wolfby, she's the senior vice president sustainability within Jonas. And then I have Jean-François Gauthier, senior vice president at GHE SAT. I will let you introduce yourselves in a while. Perhaps while introducing yourself, Marta, I know that consulting and your team, you're working with abatement strategies for big oil and gas companies. Could you tell us a bit about your work and what you do, and please introduce yourself as well?
Well, thank you. Thank you, Maria, for inviting me. It is a pleasure to be here. Marta Vasquez. I have the privilege to be leading the methane abatement topic at my company in oil and gas, which is primarily upstream and midstream. Now you ask me, what is our role? What is the role we play in tackling the methane challenge? So let me just mention briefly 5 of the things that we work with companies in. So the first one, it is surprising, but there is still quite a bit of awareness to be done. And part of our role is to bring the visibility of the methane emissions and the intensity asset by asset in the oil and gas companies' operations. Now it's extremely important to have the reality grounded by facts, and this is where data, specifically for methane, makes a big part. So that's the first part. The first part, awareness, the right benchmark. Second, target. Many companies have, but many don't. So we help commit companies to this important aspiration. Third, create a credible, reliable, but pragmatic baseline, because creating, the data fact-based baseline will take time, right? But we need a starting point, right? We have to be practical. So depending on the asset type, where you are, there is policy, there is not. We are able to know, based on history, based on other campaigns we've seen over the last 3-5 years, what could be, what could be the baseline of emissions? What's the starting point? That's quite important. Fourth, the abatement pathway, and there are some strategic choices, but there are some no regrets. There are times when companies have to accept you will need to either retrofit your compressor big time, or you need to replace it. Like, there is no way around it. You will need to change your practices. You will need to increase your plant reliability. And lastly, the methane abatement, it is we're strong believers, me personally as well. Maria, we've talked about this, and I think, Charlotte, you will be able to testify that decarbonization and methane abatement is not a one-off. It doesn't get done in 3 months or 1 year. It is a transformation. You need to touch. It's not only the technology and the measurement one time. It has to be structurally embedded into KPIs, processes, culture, mindsets. Thank you.
Thank you, Marta. Now, Charlotte, you work as a chief sustainability officer at Petronas, and I know Petronas is a company who has done a lot of efforts in decarbonization, and and is a leader in sustainability topics. And I know that your company is also setting net zero targets for 2030 and looking into sort of the cutting down in efforts and reducing emissions in your assets. Can you please introduce yourself and please tell us a bit about your daily work?
Well, good morning, everyone. Pardon me. Good afternoon, everybody. And thank you very much, Maria, for this invitation. And great to be here at the Digital Innovation Pavilion, pardon me, and also to be here with this illustrious panel. So I am indeed the Chief Sustainability Officer of Petronas. Petronas is Malaysia's national oil and gas company. So what does my day job mean? When I took me about 3.5 years ago, the first effort that me and my team did was to develop the net zero carbon emissions pathway by 2050. But it's not just about emissions for us. We're also there to look at nature. So we embed under our net zero carbon emission pathway also a big sort of understanding around what's energy's role in nature. And we also, in Malaysia is one of the 12 biologically megadiverse countries in the world. So how can we support that ecosystem also through our business? And I mentioned this because nature and climate, of course, are intrinsically linked. But to succeed with anything, as the abstract of the Paris Agreement says, if you don't think about people, with people in the center, non-climate actions for our work. So we had a big focus on just transition. We don't have a perfect performer there, but we have undergone a major stakeholder engagement exercise to understand what do people want from the future and what does an energy transition mean. So that's kind of my day job. I have a wonderful team, and I say this because there's a lot of Petronas people in my team, and mostly engineers, but I also had this great opportunity of building a team of ecologists, biodiversity specialists, and it really is a wholesome team. And we also now have some socioeconomists, so very wholesome approach to sustainability. On methane specifically, it's something we embedded immediately into our net zero carbon emission pathway by 2050. We have set some targets. And the most amazing thing is, so this is where it benefits having a lot of engineers in your team. When you focus on something and you define the problem, they will go very quickly at it. So in Petronas' case, we have a methane emission target for 2025, which is to reduce emissions internationally by 50%. And well, we have already surpassed that target. I think we are around 58% reductions already based on our baseline from 2019. And this is the point. I think is if you have to mark this aspect as well. If you know what we're trying to solve for, but you need a team in place, you need objectives, and then you can drive towards that. We also have a 2030 target, and I'll stop in a moment. I just want to mention that it's quite interesting. We have a 70% methane emission reduction target by 2030, but this is for international operations, so global operations. But we also have a target for the natural gas value chain for Malaysia, so to reduce methane emissions by 50%. But this is beyond Petronas operations, and this is quite unique. I don't know, there probably is some other company that has this goal. I haven't heard of such, but we have set a target for the whole Malaysia oil and gas basin to drive down methane emissions by 50% by 2030. This is embedded also in our engagement with those who hold licenses in Malaysia. So that's kind of, we're going all out when it comes to it. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Indeed, it sounds very ambitious targets as well. So really sort of looking forward to sort of following those over the years. Jean-François Gauthier, you're a senior vice president at GHG SAT. GHG SAT is a satellite. So could you please tell us a bit about methane monitoring and how do you do it with satellites?
Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me to be here with you all today. It's obviously a very important topic, one that's very near and dear to us at GHGSat and obviously to many here at top. So thank you for bringing visibility to it. So GHGSat is a Canadian company that owns its own fleet of satellites to measure greenhouse gas emissions directly from industrial sources around the world. So this is something that we pioneered in 2016 with the launch of our first satellite. Prior to us, satellites would look at greenhouse gas emissions at the global or regional scale, but we were the first ones to do it directly from industrial facilities. Now, we do this at 25-meter resolution, 100 kilograms per hour emission rate. So it allows us to very precisely identify which facilities are emitting, and in some cases, which piece of equipment for a facility is emitting. For example, we can identify in many cases that a flare is unlit and help our customer take action based on this. So our model is that we work directly with industry as a partner to help them better understand and address their emissions. We also work with governments, we work with NGOs, we work with anyone who wishes to access this data. So we're really an independent purveyor of data, but our model differs a little bit from other satellites that you may have heard recently that were launched, such as Methane Sat and Carbon Mapper, and that they are funded by philanthropy. Their goal is to go through informing civil society, which is obviously very useful and important. For us at GHGSat, we feel we have the greatest impact by working primarily directly with industry. In the last year, actually, we're compiling the numbers for 2024. But for 2023, our data was used to reduce in excess of 6 megatons of CO2 equivalent in methane emissions around the world with our partners. So there's obviously a lot more work to be done. This is a small fraction of what we see, but the results are very encouraging in terms of seeing data really being put to use. And I think we'll get the chance to discuss that a little bit more later in the panel.
Thank you so much, Jan. Now, speaking about the methane monitoring landscape, so if we think about the voluntary frameworks like OGMP, and the EU has now implemented, based on the OGMP, a very strict regulation on methane, which requires not only calculation models to be utilized, but also source level and site level measurements to be conducted. So the sort of methane data and applying methane data, analyzing methane data and recording that, understanding the data being measured is a key. Now, Martha, when you do abatement strategies for companies, when you do baseline estimations, how do you use the data? What data sets are you utilizing in order to sort of compile a sort of methane abatement strategy, for instance, for a company?
Thank you. I think I said it at the beginning, I would love to say it again. I think it's invaluable, specifically for methane, to have the true real data for your asset. Now, there are other situations when an analog or the estimate or the hypothesis can work and you can make choices on that basis. It's really not for methane. There is a part, let me just say that there is a part where you can predict, right? You have an old vintage turbine, if you have a 30-year-old compressor, if you know that you have been operating with practices that you haven't updated in the recent decade, I mean, you can foresee, you can foresee certain things, but we genuinely believe that launching the campaign together with your clients in a representative asset as a pilot is a very good first step, and this is exactly what we help them do. Let's identify which is the pilot that makes sense, what you actually need to acquire, and what is the minimum representative data set, so that you can start to guide your abatement action. The second data set that we use in the US This is specifically is we work closely with IMU and OGMP. So if a company belongs to the OGMP has this commitment, then we're able to work with this data set as well to be able to inform where you are, what is the starting point. But lastly, as hopefully people by now know, there is multiple ways to acquire the data. I mean, there is the satellite, there is drone, there is the ground measurement, and so on. It is important to bring the right mix of technologies together with the operational data of the asset to be able to give you context to what you see, right? Because ultimately you don't want to only abate once, but you want to make sure that you're making structural choices so that truly is a sustainable strategy, right? And also you can get smarter, right? And even the way you operate and maintain your assets more efficiently. So this is the third data set is the operational and reconciliation via a digital platform that maybe someone here, I don't know if you would like to make a digital platform later on, Charlotte.
Thank you, Marta. Charlotte, I know that Petronas has worked a lot with innovation and bringing the technology providers together. A few years ago, hosted a massive decarbonization challenge when you invited technology providers to sort of innovate with you novel technology and improve technologies on your assets and for you. Can you, Charlotte, tell us a bit of that and about the technology and how you select the technologies and what are the sort of requirements for you?
Certainly. So maybe a little bit of history of kind of how we got here. So we as a company, we committed to net zero carbon emissions by 2050. We launched our initial roadmap back in 2022. And that set in motion a lot of things. So one effort was to indeed launch something we call Race to Decarbonize. This was an open innovation challenge. It was amazing. We had responses from 25 plus countries around the world, and it was around driving down emissions. And of course, we can then test those technologies and approaches to our assets. On Methane specifically, also a little bit of a history lesson. Back in 2021, it was clear that there were a lot of countries were campaigning and trying for COP26 for something that's now called a global methane pledge. And this was for countries to sign up to reduce methane emissions by 30% by 2030. I think today, is it 250 countries plus have signed up to this? So we saw this coming. And what we did in October 2021 was the leadership of the CEOs of Petronas, PTT in Thailand and also in Indonesia involved as well. We launched something called the ASEAN Energy Sector Methane Roundtable. This goes back to Martha's point. We have to start with awareness. The emissions are very, the oil and gas industry is very familiar with emissions, but methane specifically might not be being addressed as a community. So we brought the CEOs together to really galvanize awareness and raise awareness around the topic of methane emission abatement for the whole region and involving all the national authorities of Southeast Asia. This program then evolved and built from strength to strength, and we then launched back in 2023 something called the Methane Leadership Program, together with the support of USAID. And this was an 18-month program to bring all the practitioners together from across Southeast Asia, so the operators, but then also technology providers and other experts from around the world. We had master classes, workshops, we've had over hundreds of people involved. It's been so successful that we had to launch the Methane Leadership Program 2.0. So that was launched a few weeks ago. And so the previous program was about capacity and capability around this and reporting methodologies and so on. And we also have some technology demonstrations. But this next program is about really doing the work, so actually putting the equipment in and doing the stuff, but also to match funding to real projects. And Petronas also launched the same time, a few weeks ago, an initiative that we did together with Joint Plan, which is a Methane Innovation Technology Evaluation Center. So we're going to put it as part of 2 educational institutions in Malaysia, open for whole Southeast Asia. So that means going forward, all technicians, all engineers will be trained on managing methane emissions going forward. So you have to imagine University of Technology Petronas, highest ranked private university in Southeast Asia, over 4,000 engineers graduate every year, and they will only know how to manage methane emissions going forward. It will be part of their curriculum. Same thing for vocational training, Institute for INSET. So that's sort of we're trying to build a whole ecosystem around this. And technology has been very important. What works in one part of the world might not work in other parts of the world. And this is something that's been very critical for us to create this ecosystem and to be able to share notes with other companies. Have you tested a certain type of technology? Because the tropics are very different from a cold country. I used to work more in the North Sea environment before, very different from tropical waters in Malaysia. So not all the same tools and applications will work like that. I'm not going to talk about satellites as I have this satellite next to me, but they also, I guess you have to adopt your technology to where you are. And also I would say that these things, you have to dedicate a team in place, you have to know what you do and learn quickly and engage. And I think we managed to bring the whole region to a good space now where there will be many, many more projects that will be financed. But we really need to also make sure that we can measure and then reduce, as Martha was saying, and that's kind of the next step where we are at, and identifying the real projects. But it is costly, it's happening a lot of technology where it's not the work. So that's why I think these collaborative efforts are really critical to talk today.
Charlotte, it seems like you're doing really groundwork, sort of pioneering work in Malaysia and training streamline operators as well in to the methane and the importance of them. Rudolf also you use satellites to measure methane. Could you please tell us a bit how the data is gathered and how is it utilized, and how do you have any concrete examples on us you collecting data?
Yeah, so thank you. And I mean, looking at the the ecosystem of satellite data, you have to take a step back and look at technologies in general. And Martha touched on it before. There's no single solution. So satellites are one of many, but it really is about different technologies working together to get the best possible picture of issues across the spectrum. So it's satellites working with aircraft, with drones, with in situ sensors, and handheld cameras, and so on. So, but so there's increasing complementarity and compatibility of data. But if you go just at the satellite level, that's also very true. So there's different systems that are available, new systems that are coming online as well, and they're all complementary, and they can be even more powerful together. So on the full spectrum here, you have satellites like Sentinel-5P Tropomi from the European Space Agency that gathers data more. These types of satellites are called global mappers, so they look at a whole area and very coarse resolution, 7-kilometer resolution, but they are very powerful, very precise instruments, and you can identify hotspots around the world to perhaps focus on a little bit better. On the other side of the spectrum, you have point source imagers, like what we do, JSHISAC. And we've been working very closely, actually, with an institute in the Netherlands called SRON, that they're the principal investigators for Tropomi, for Sentinel-5P. And by identifying hotspots around the world, we can zero in and help identify the facilities that are responsible. And it's obviously not just oil and gas. We measure landfills and dumping sites around the world. 30% of the emissions that we see. Another about 20-25% is coal mines around the world as well. And we see different sites like hydroelectric facilities, believe it or not. In some cases, can be pretty powerful sources of methane. So it really is about trying to collaborate across platforms, trying to generate data that is usable. But then beyond that, different sectors will use the data differently. So it's also important to, first of all, distribute it the way people want to receive it. Sometimes it's through a platform, and Martha alluded to that earlier. There's a bevy of different digital platforms that are emerging to aggregate data, combine different sources, and make them more usable for the end users. But some will prefer to just ingest it through an API and do the manipulations themselves, and that has to be available too. So there's really different ways to do this, and also if you look at the financial sector, for example, they could not care less about imagery and what a plume looks like. They care more about having an abundance of data to better understand regional trends, or being able to track industries versus others, or companies within one industry. So it's more of a tabular format rather than a graphical format. So it's important to really listen and understand to all the different sectors so that they can be geared to, and they can have ultimately data in their hands that they can aggregate with other sources, but also act on and make sense of.
You really enjoyed your part when you said like these bits and leaves. So what we have seen at Erawan also, we just sort of became an accredited laboratory. We saw a significant need in different regions and for this, sort of due to the stricter regulation, also a need to prove that the technology is really accurate, and the data that it provides is something that we can use for reporting and for quality reporting. But sort of speaking a bit on how this different regional requirements, if we look at OGMP, that is a voluntary framework, which oil and gas companies have signed up to, and now EU has implemented this or the regulation based on this OGMP voluntary framework, although a bit in a stricter form. And then you see EPA and the US sort of requesting for technology evaluations. So perhaps sort of my question to you is like, how do you see the sort of global frameworks moving into more regional regulation, and how to what are your sort of take on that? Perhaps this is a question, let me go to Jean-François, on your sort of company with satellite is inherently sort of global, so how do you tackle perhaps sort of more regional requirements and regulations? How adaptable do you adapt your data in somehow for the regional sort of requirements, or do you see that happening in the future?
Well, I think it will be interesting to hear from Charlotte on OGMP and how companies are actually implementing OGMP and working within that framework. But for us as a data provider, we're a little bit unique because we gather data from space. We don't have to be on the ground. We don't have to have people on the ground or accessing facilities. So it is a bit easier. So the data is the same across all regions. Is actually one of the powerful things about our data. You're taking out variability from operator error, for example, or calibration of instruments, so you're looking at everything with the same eyes. So that's certainly one of the aspects that is very very powerful with satellites. It also, however, doesn't mean that we don't need to do advance work to discuss things with regulators and different governments in order to have the data accepted as a way to monitor emissions. And for us at HCSAT, the pickup from industry was very quick from 2016. The industry tends to be more able and apt to take on new technologies and take the risk and test new ways to do things. Governments on the reverse side of that coin can be a lot more careful and cautious, and you need a lot more validation. You need to prove that the technology is accurate, it is repeatable. So we, over the last several years, we've gone through many rounds of testing. Validation is an important part of what we do. We've done what's called blind testing with third parties, where an amount of gas is released on the ground. We measure it, and then we submit our results. Those are compared with what's emitted on the ground, and then you can assess the accuracy of the technology. So we've done several rounds of that. We've also gone through an extensive validation with space agencies like NASA and ESA. We've been given the stamp of approval in terms of our data being accurate, reliable, and worthy of working in conjunction with data from those space agencies themselves. So that level of validation makes it possible at that point for governments to start embracing the data and work with the same type of data that industry is working with. Industry can now use that data, the government understands it and accepts it in terms of meeting regulations. So it's a work in progress, but it's starting to coalesce now. It feels like where there's an openness to new ways to do things, which make it possible for industry, for operators to meet these regulations in a more cost-effective and realistic way. Because otherwise, historically, the methods were not necessarily realistic and cost-effective. They were very time-consuming and costly, and it's just simply not feasible.
Petronas has upstream production in Malaysia, but also in the border, on a global scale. So sort of having a unified standard for the emission reporting and monitoring must be difficult. What is the sort of reconciliation that you have to do with the internal, external demands or requests within countries?
Well, thank you. I think what's quite interesting to see is that regulation goes ahead of practice, in this case in some countries. So we're still working through methodologies, technologies evolving, there's no exact science, and yet the regulations are already there. So I think that's quite interesting. But of course, it's not uniform, it's not global. In the Petronas case, we were actively involved in the methane guiding principles, which is a oil and gas industry initiative to really build practices of methane emission management. So that helps us to get through. Then we sign up to OGMP 2.0, and that's been very important for us to follow sort of a framework of how you solve it. We've learned a lot, I must say. We've learned a lot, still learning a lot, and there's no one answer. We're testing different technologies in different parts of the world. And it's clear that calculations are obviously highly inaccurate, right? You need to do the testing on the ground, and it's reconciled perhaps with satellites in some part of the world and other measurements on the ground. So there will be a lot of development in this space, I believe. But of course, when you're already regulated in some parts of the world, so you want to be as accurate as possible so you can get a big bill later on, and then you have to ask for a discount later on if you pay too much. But right now, I think we are in a good space now because OGMP is sort of becoming a bit of a more mainstream framework. I would just say industry must be allowed to work on it for a little while. Now is not the time to call out who's doing worse than others. Let's instead bring everybody in the tent and work through this. This is a relatively new space, and we need to bring as many companies along as we can. A huge encouraging factor is the Oil and Gas Decarbonization Charter that was signed during COP28 last year. I think there's now 54 companies in the world, oil and gas producers, that signed up to this, and the majority of these are national oil companies. And they are all committed to near zero medium emissions by 2030. So the industry is definitely working on this from Africa to Canada and Malaysia and so on. I would say that going forward also we need regulators to work with the industry and with technology providers, because this is a moving space. Nobody has the exact answer, so I hope that we can continue with that going forward, and also maybe have flexible regulation, because we're not there yet. There's a lot of learning system. Thank you.
Marta, you work with oil and gas companies globally. How do you keep up with the national regulations being present, and how do you keep up with all of those? How do you manage?
Thank you, Maria. But first, where the policy is more advanced and the regulation is more advanced is immediately clear, at least from our own clients. Actually, the companies themselves can perceive that they are subject to the implication of the EU regulation on methane, because they are an exporter to that region. In Australia recently, there was a big movement, and now there is a higher penalty that you could get. The allowance is going down, there is higher penalty. There is more financial liability for the companies. So actually, they themselves are coming to us with this boring platform. It is also an opportunity. It is also an opportunity. And I think beyond, you already mentioned OGMP and OGDC. I mean, these are also two areas of big awareness for us, and we bring the two regions where it is less common practice. But going back to, in the places where there is no policy or regulation pressure or incentive yet, I think we make even bigger effort to demonstrate the business value of abating the methane emissions. Now, in more experience, I know this is written in all the books and websites, but truly 40 to 60% of initiatives are in the money. You will get the money back if you are able to monetize the gas you will otherwise waste. It doesn't mean that there is no capex. There is capex, but the capex required is much lower, and you would need to be able to abate this to carbon capture 10 years from now. And I think these are myths or things that we know, but it is an important argument that we have to hang on to, right, where the policy regulation is not there yet. So that's first. And second, something else that we are I'm quite a believer. I've been in oil and gas for more than 20 years, oil and gas operations. I have to recognize this. And I feel that we have the responsibility to demonstrate we're capable to do this with excellence, right? This is part of operational excellence, more than ever and increasingly, right? If you cannot do this without waste and without damaging the environment, I think there is a threat to the license to operate in this industry. And it's like, how can we be capable to operate in new emerging industries if we cannot even manage something properly that we have operated for 40, 50 years? So all of these arguments we use in addition to the policy and regulation awareness.
I would also say it's not easy. This is complicated. I think that's very important. And maybe just to say, Marta, I would maybe connect, because this is about methane emissions. So that's not something we would use for carbon capture and storage. It's for CO2. So maybe not split the two, but it's true you can monetize some of it. But yeah, there's definitely it is complex, it's complicated. A lot of tests and trials need to be undertaken. You do need to invest in this. And I think not everything can be monetized. I see various figures, and I think they're maybe don't apply for everything and everybody. But there's definitely a strong business case for company generation.
Thank you, and I think sort of taking on the operational excellence and sort of achieving things. I know that all of you have success cases that we could share, because I think for us to understand what it takes, we could learn from each other's experiences. So could you please share some of the experiences that you sort of done and you feel proud of, and specifically with methane data and reliable data and reporting?
Happy to get started because we have a lot of exciting stories to share. Now we're just scratching the surface at the same time. So as Charlotte indicated, it's not easy. There's a perception perhaps sometimes that we have data, so why not take action? And it's a little bit more complicated than that. There's various barriers, various reasons why, and that's one of the reasons why at GSHSAC we've made a commitment very early on to not just be a data provider that throws data over the fence and runs away. So, do what you please with it. We try to find partners to try to remove some of those barriers. Sometimes they're financial, sometimes they're knowledge-based or experience-based. Some companies, some NOCs might have they might not know where to start once they get a glimpse of the challenge that's ahead. So finding the right partners, finding the right levers to pull can make a big difference. So I'll share a few examples. One is the campaigns that we've been running with our partners at HCI for the last several years, starting with Iraq in 2022. It was sort of believed for a long time that engaging on the ground in Iraq would not be possible, at least for a long time. And through that partnership with OGCI, with partnership as well with Carbon Limits in Norway, we were able to put data in the hands of NOCs on the ground in Iraq. One of them was the North Oil Company in Iraq there. And with that data, they were able to actually mitigate several emissions and have a positive impact that is most importantly scalable. Like that type of program, that type of approach is scalable within that country, with that operator within that country and to other countries. To that end, we've now expanded that program to other countries like Kazakhstan, Algeria, and Egypt, and looking at going beyond that. And it's the type of framework that could help move the needle for the OGDC as well, in starting with small steps that are showing real progress, showing real reductions, and then it can be scaled quite rapidly. The last one I'll share is quite unique. It was from last February. We were working in a Central Asian country with our partners again at Carbon Limits and TP Europe, and we achieved the fastest mitigation using satellite data in the world by far. It was done in a single day. So satellite data, historically, it takes days to get your hands on it, like for public data from satellites like 705P or NASA satellites. It could take several days, sometimes weeks, to get your hands on the data. In this particular case, we collected data on several sites in that country, sent it right away, same day, to those partners. And of course, you need to have the right people lined up on the ground, right stakeholders ready. But on that same day, they were digging into the ground to fix pipelines. They were fixing valves and flares as well. So we had 3 out of 4 emissions. One was fully mitigated. 2 of them were partly mitigated. The reason why we say partly is because a slight amount was still visible through an OGI camera, and we want to be rigorous and not claim that it was fully gone. It certainly wasn't visible through satellites anymore. The 4th one was a much larger one that required a lot of permitting to shut down the facility before they could do it. But still, again, this is all about scalability. This type of approach with the right stakeholders ready to act shows that there's great potential in acting like this on data. So Those are just some of the examples. There's a perception perhaps that satellite data is coming. It's like, new satellites are being launched, and that's very exciting. The ecosystem is growing, but this has been happening for years. Like, we've been in this since 2016, 12 satellites in orbit and 9 more coming. So it's in full swing right now. And this is just one small part. Again, to the point I made earlier, satellites are one small part of that equation. You have drones, aircraft, and so on. So.
Perhaps no sort of success stories, but I guess a learning is that everybody needs to work together. Different types of technology, different times of the day, and so on. And depends on all kinds of parameters. Might have different readings. It's important to have the OGMP is so strong for that because it's a proper framework. I think it's very important. I think that we heard that you can't just dump data out there. It's going to be meaningless. And I think this is a very important point. This is not about, oh, that looks like a lot, must be a bad situation. That's not quite how it works. We need to work together and understand what's going on and what's the status of that facility specifically. And I think also in Aramon, exactly where do you put your drones out? What's the wind conditions? And so how can you capture the most of the emissions? And I think right now we're in a good place where the world has come together to collaborate on this. And I think it's good that we're driving for greater transparency and that should really help us to get to near zero by 2030. And we are in a sweet spot right now, but I hope that regulators and others can work with the whole ecosystem to make sure that we're trying to drive down emissions effectively and do it in the most conducive way possible.
You both mentioned I think a very important point also that it's not a one-off. So methane measurements are not just one-offs there. It's part of a project, a longer sprint that we have to do together. One of my favorites, I'm a big fan of reconciliation, reconciling site level and tools level, so that the ground measurements together with top-down monitoring, which actually is going to the nitty-gritty of the details within those data and helping the maintenance team of sites really fix the leaks that go down, but also, of course, in a wider scope, like over the years, and see how the emissions go down as we proceed in the maintenance activity. So that's some of the things that I've been learning, doing repeated measurements and going down with a larger frame. Martha, do you have any success stories that you could share with us?
Thank you, Maria. If there are 3, I think one of them is actually building on this digital platform. And I think you mentioned, Jean-Francois, there are many platforms and many companies that offer such a solution. Now, we realize also for the preference or confidentiality reasons, some people prefer to build their own. Okay, so we are doing both. We're doing both. Whatever you do, make sure you have one, right? Because this solution can really help you bring it together and lead to action, like you said, and also demonstrate the business case. I think when people have done this, or when people are doing this is a success story because it's easier to have visibility of the value of what you have invested. So what is the impact of your action? And I think this is important. The tool matters for that, and to make all the links that you mentioned, the missions to the operations to the maintenance. Now, the second case study I just wanted to share today is around the mindset and the behavior and the culture. And this has been a big surprise for us and for me personally in the last few months, truly, is that there are people that when you tell them that flange is leaking quite a bit, they say, I really knew, but nobody told me I should tighten the flange, or I am not authorized to tighten the flange. So that is when then changing officially your practices and processes. That is one aspect. There are people who never imagine that emissions footprint that their own facility has, right? And when you show them, genuinely people want to do the right thing, right? So then, like Shanla said, the engineer or the asset manager says, okay, I'm just gonna do everything in my power, right? I cannot be the top emitter in my company, right? Or in my asset class. But lastly, and this is sad, but maybe I start to understand and maybe I behave like that too. Sometimes you tell people, I think we measure big emissions on your facility with the satellite. And the people say, impossible. I have no methane emissions in my facility, I've been here for 20 years. And then you go again with the drone and you say, okay, we measure the gain, right? And it is just, there are more and more proof points that you will have it. And eventually, it becomes quite clear that the team has to accept the reality. And I don't think people are trying to be bad actor. I think it's also the mindset and the culture that we need to just create an environment where people feel free to say, yes, it is true, and I will play my part. And I think this is one of the biggest challenges. You mentioned it's complex. I think it's definitely complex with technology and the process, but it's also very complex from the transformation that an organization has to go through. So this is a big surprise, and some people are starting to tackle this.
Thank you, Martha, for sharing the surprises as well. I think there's a lot of learnings in it. I think we can all sort of, we all know sort of, some of the surprises that we've had on our pathway. We are today at COP29. What are your expectations towards COP29 and methane? Any expectations towards methane this COP?
Listen, I think we've heard about the disappointment about talks year over year about the discussion about pledges and commitments, and then next year it should be the COP of action, but then there's more pledges and commitments. I don't want to diminish those because, as Charlotte mentioned, the GC was a very important breakthrough, building on the global methane pledge, which was at the national level. Now you have companies involved, so that was a really needed step. However, these pledges a lot of times look at 2030 as the benchmark, as the finish line, so to speak, or at least an important checkpoint. We're 5 years to go essentially now, and by all accounts, very little progress to show for it. So there's pockets of progress. There's certainly a lot of very important initiatives and a lot of leadership that's emerging. But it's time for action now. It's time to do something. And one of my favorite responses, years ago, 2016, 2017, when we started doing what we do, we would often be asked, like, what's the next step for technology? What's the next thing that's happening? What are you working towards? And my answer now is the technologies are here. Not just for monitoring. It's not just drones and satellites and other technologies. The technologies for abatement are there too. So it's about finding the right ways, the right mechanisms to put them into place in a responsible, scalable way, so that regulations are met, so that objectives are met, and all of this is obviously very complex. It was mentioned several times, but if we don't get going, we're out of time. And if I may mention, there's geopolitical changes right now that are happening that will make this even more challenging. So there's a need to really band together and really drive towards those goals.
So maybe 3 points. If you think about the negotiations, maybe a breakthrough on Article 6, so maybe that would go on my shopping list for these 2 weeks. Nothing to do with me, of course, here, but hopefully the negotiations can roll around that. the COPs, climate COPs have become, I heard somebody say this a few years ago, it's become the world's largest climate trade fair. And I think it's the right direction, because some people might say the purist is only negotiations and so on, but we need action. And you won't get any action by involving the world and the private sector, the investors and so on. That means that some of the suits will need to move in. And I think it's COP gives us a cadence of annual delivery. Without COP, we will take longer. It does push things forward. So I do feel that let it be that sort of trade fair that it has become, because if we don't convene together around the sole objective around addressing climate change, how are we going to do it? Who legitimately can bring us together? So I'm all for bigger COPs, because if the energy industry isn't here, as we are the source of most of the man-made emissions, how could we possibly engage with other parts of society? And for me personally, I mentioned at the start that our agenda very much is about nature action, climate action, and social action. COP is a wonderful platform where we can engage in an environment with youth groups, indigenous groups, and other groups, and bringing it all together around common objectives. So that would be my COP.
Thank you. What can I add? I think there's only one hope, that I would love to learn the concrete actions and successes of different people in different countries, different organizations around the world. I think Vincenza, you mentioned the movement for pledge to action. We need both. But I'm just too hungry to hear what works, and then be able to take that lesson with me to others.
Thank you so much for joining the panel discussion with me today. I think we've had a good discussion on methane and the sort of need for reliable methane data. And I think we sort of also discussed about actions and needed actions and learnings and sharing learnings, and also educating the teams on site, doing the operational excellence and linking the methane data to the real actions on site, on maintenance, fixing the valve, but also, of course, the reporting part and sort of taking that further into the reporting of the emissions. And that being not only a one-off, but also a journey and seeing the emissions going down for the energy sector. Thank you so much for joining me. And I wish you a very good